On a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby. An update on this week's political agenda. Dan Flynn, the Deputy Director of the ACL, is joining us. Dan, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you, Neil.
Hey Dan, let's touch on something that's on the front page of the Weekend Australian over the weekend. A transgender person regretting their decisions. What are your thoughts, and give us some insight into that front page?
Well, I think you were probably like me and picked up the Weekend Australian, as people do, and people across the country have picked this up, and to read about Ollie Davies, a 26-year-old Melbourne man who, when he was very depressed, went and, thought, well, perhaps he could be a woman. This might be his answer. He went and spoke to some psychiatrist who gave him 45 minutes and said, yes, this person definitely, qualifies. We've got to affirm their view, and the criteria is fulfilled. And the psychiatrist said, yep, gender dysphoria. So young Ollie, who is now complaining that the underlying depression and other motives he had weren't explored, he became a woman and then realised, while there was initial euphoria and acceptance in the LGBT community, found out that this just wasn't right for him, has now transitioned back to being a man, although he's infertile and has other medical consequences. And he's basically setting up a flare. This guy is not a Christian, but saying, look, there are going to be thousands of people who regret this gender transition. He's being incredibly brave. He's saying, look, basically he transitioned because of the culture that came from doctors, school curriculum, media, social media, and he, as a man, didn't really fit the stereotype. So then the suggestion was he was trans, and he basically concludes by saying, I felt like I'd pretty much been involved in a cult. So what an incredibly amazing story Ollie has. It's a story, no doubt, of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who've, changed their gender as part of this, woke social movement. He's regretting it, and he's telling his story. It's great to hear, Neil.
And at a time like this, Dan, when governments around Australia appear to be just forging ahead to change laws that are going to make this man's story something of the norm. Let's touch on what's happening in Tasmania with their conversion therapy laws. What's the developments there?
Well, basically, if this fellow, Ollie, if he presented to a medical practitioner, to a pastor, to a counsellor, to a parent, they would be, banned from resisting his stated desire to become a woman. And so he wouldn't be able to explore, alternatives to that. And also, when he decided he wanted to become a man again, he wouldn't be able to get any help for that either. And so all the help that he says that he needed at both parts of this journey would be denied and would be criminalised. And so there was a lot of work happening. Christopher Bro here, the Australian Christian Lobby director down there, he's working closely with other faith leaders, medical experts, even feminists, to push back against this law that is trying to be pushed past a Liberal government in Tasmania, a Liberal government who appears to be quite fearful of the LGBT lobby in Tasmania.
It's a crazy circumstance that's going on, Dan. Your thoughts here, because as soon as anyone speaks up, and Christians are outspoken because there is concern that innocent people are going to be caught up in all sorts of things that are going to be life-altering, and especially in regards to children. But now there are organisations like the Tasmanian Law Institute that are making it rather difficult with their latest report, recommending all sorts of restrictions on how you might even present any sort of religious or biblical belief there that might impact on someone's decisions.
Well, that's right. And so they call it bigotry, and it is definitely an attack on the gospel. Perhaps that's one of the great blessings of Ollie Davies' story, that he's clearly not a Christian, and so that it helps realise I suppose, like an archaeological dig, Neil, that, this is not just faith-based, this is biology-based, this is real human nature-based. And, these organisations like the Tasmanian Law Institute, they're ideological. They're pushing these woke agendas and they wish to suppress any contrary voices. So we're standing up and I expect we will make a difference.
So in Tasmania, Dan, clarify this for us, because these sorts of reports recommend that parents or pastors, even medical practitioners, won't have any say, and it'll be against the law to even have a conversation around the dinner table around issues about sexuality or gender confusion.
How could this be right, Neil? How could this be right? We're not in a communist country where you would think that our evening meal discussions would be, subject to review by government, just simple parenting along biological lines. But this is what's being pushed by the LGBT activists, and you're absolutely right. You've phrased it perfectly. That's what's at risk.
And there's a way that people listening to our conversation today can take some action, even if it's just the signing of a petition. There's a government petition on the ACL website.
Yes, look, this petition is important. It's a parliamentary petition, and there is a petition to prevent this law. There's also a competing petition by LGBT activists. So we are working hard to get all Tasmanians of faith, Tasmanians who believe in biology, to sign this. I think we're around the 3,000 mark at the moment, and both parties, as it were, to these competing petitions have been given an extension of time. So we do urge people to get active, sign it and share it.
Dan, let's turn our attention to some developments in Western Australia around drag queen shows. A little bit of progress here, but an all-age drag show no longer open to children. This is some good news, isn't it?
Well, it is, because the topic of this was all-age drag show. It was clearly intended by those putting this on that, children, preschoolers, people who would tend to go to drag queen story time, those type of young people would be able to go to this drag show, dress as drag, enjoy the frivolity of the LGBT party, as it were. But thanks to the astuteness of Peter Abetz, our Western Australian director, and those who work with him, they wrote directly to the mayor and councillors of the city of Fremantle and pushed that petition and correspondence very hard. So the city of Fremantle has now relented in that they have said, OK, under 13 people will not be allowed to attend, full stop. Anybody under 18 will need the permission of their parent or guardian. So that's a great win. So the all-age drag show is now, effectively an over-18 drag show, as it should be. And so this is great progress, and it does show what happens when, thousands of people write to their councillors, because the councillors depend on these people's vote to stay in office. It's people power, and getting elected is a priority. Getting re-elected is a great priority. So thank you to all those Western Australians who did that.
Dan, is there any likelihood that could set some sort of a precedent around the whole of Australia, where children are not allowed to go and see these sorts of drag queen spectaculars, but even as that might even relate to drag queen story time in public libraries? I know there are some other developments that are going on, especially in the state of Queensland, but is there likely to be any sort of precedent you think could be set by that?
I think precedent's too strong a word, Neil, because each of these battles has to be fought in that local area, because a precedent like this, other councils are not going to want to apply it. If they're in any way LGBT orientated, they'll want it all age. So, there hasn't been any success in the Brisbane City Council of, sort of overruling, as it were, the drag queen story time. And the latest we're hearing from Brisbane is that a senior councillor there wants to ban people from objecting to drag queen story time. So the idea of objecting, making the objection, that's what will be banned. So it's a fraught battle. the win in WA will not be a precedent. These battles will have to be fought again and again.
It almost seems really quite strange that anyone could call for a ban on objections in a nation where we have prided ourselves on a level of free speech and being able to speak up and complain if there's something that we don't like. As people complained about all the good things, now you're trying to ban the people from complaining about bad things. Hey, let's turn our sights to Victoria. Another bit of good news, something good to report here around Fiona Patten's bill. It failed in the Victorian Parliament.
Well, that's correct. What Fiona Patten was trying to do by her bill was to say that faith-based hospitals like St Vincent's in Victoria who receive public money, these faith-based hospitals could not decide they're not doing abortions or could not say they're not performing euthanasia. So abortion and euthanasia currently in St Vincent's Hospital are not conducted, and doctors are not permitted to do them at these hospitals. People who go there won't be able to get these life-ending procedures. But they do take funding from the government. So her bill was to say, well, any faith-based hospital who takes government money must perform these. So the conscientious objection of the hospital must be overruled. That bill failed. The reason that the bill failed was because the Daniel Andrews government voted against it, along with the Liberal Party, who you would expect to. So there was effectively the Greens and some very sort of left-wing crossbenchers, so 7 people against 28 in the upper house when it came on for a vote last week. What that means, Neil, is that there's an election coming in Victoria. The Labor Party, while they probably agree with Fiona Patten's bill, know that to do this would be to absolutely poke the Christian constituency in the eye. It would be to anger the Catholic Church and Catholic congregation members to basically say that their faith-based hospitals, the Mercy Maternity Hospital, St Vincent's, have to perform these horrible operations. And so if this happened in the first year of the term of government, we might have a different outcome. But, 3 months out from an election, the Labor government's not going to pick that fight. So bravo to the Victorian Christians and other faith communities who've, really stood up over the last few years. I think Daniel Andrews is getting the message, and that's good.
And thousands of Australian Christian lobby supporters who came to the fore and exercised their right to object here, and they actually asked for rejection of this bill. So good on those thousands of supporters of the ACL.
Absolutely, you're right, Neil.
Okay, let's talk issues around the Indigenous Voice. You've had some thought or two to around the Indigenous Voice. What are your thoughts here, Dan?
Well, Neil, this is going to be, one of the biggest issues probably next year. We may well see a referendum. We're told there will be a referendum as to whether to entrench an Indigenous voice in the Constitution. We don't know a lot about the provisions. I think you could broadly summarise it as to say that the Prime Minister is saying, well, we'll set up an Indigenous voice. We can make laws about how it's constituted, and it will give advice to the executive branch of government. So it's about that vague. I think there's cause for some real reservation here because, Neil, we already have a Minister for Indigenous Australians in Cabinet. We have a Department of Indigenous Affairs, so an entire department spread across the country of people who are acting for Indigenous people. All stakeholders get input into laws made in Australia, obviously including Indigenous stakeholders, and there are countless Indigenous bodies that are funded by the government. So, and also there are, I think, some 11 MPs in the federal government. 5% of our MPs identify as Indigenous. So, I think the Indigenous people are very well represented. And, no complaint about any of that. I suppose the concern is, well, if you amend the Constitution to say, well, there will be an Indigenous executive government. A, we don't know what that means because the wording is so wide. B, they may be able to go directly to the public service and bypass, parliamentary parliamentary scrutiny, rather, Neil. This is concerning because, there's a sense in which the Indigenous people are well represented into government. Why have this extra body? And it probably makes us a little wary that race is being used here to divide the Australian community, which is something entirely unnecessary. And I think there's another question too, Neil, about, well, what is an Indigenous voice? We see Jacinta Price, who's Indigenous. She opposes the voice. She's a Conservative. We see Lydia Thorpe. She's a senator of the hard left who, sought to make her oath of allegiance to the colonising Queen. So here's two senators, Indigenous, with completely divergent views. So, is there a sort of, Indigenous voice? I think there's a lot of diversity in the Indigenous community. So I'm just expressing these reservations, Neil, because this will be an emerging issue, probably not immediately apparent to people, but it will be a big issue next year.
An emerging issue and fears of division of the Australian community, and as you say, light on the detail, and perhaps deliberately, and no doubt as debate continues and getting closer to that time, more detail would be expected and people will be able to make more of a black and white decision or way that they might think about how that might affect our Australian community. Hey, Dan, let's talk about the truth of it live. Martin Iles, who's actually overseas at the present time, but getting ready for a huge opportunity in Sydney and in Canberra and in Melbourne. The Babylon series, How to Live as Bold Christians in Modern Day Babylon. These sorts of things are so popular and already thousands of people have got tickets to be a part of these events. Exciting times ahead because he'll deliver some pretty solid stuff in those gatherings.
Look, absolutely, Neil. The momentum is definitely building. The first event in Sydney on the 24th of September. It's a Saturday night in the International Convention Centre. There will be thousands of, well over 1,000 people who've booked tickets already for that. We're still, over 4 weeks out. This will be a sensational event, and it's just great to see so many Christians gathering. The gospel will be preached, a Christian worldview will be shared. It's going to be a very, very encouraging evening, and we're hoping that people travel in, from all around New South Wales to enjoy great fellowship, a great sense of vision, and perhaps some strengthening of their own backbone. One of the things that we're facing a lot is cancel culture. The remedy for cancel culture is courage culture, and we definitely see that with Martin Iles and his work on the truth of it. So, looking forward to seeing our Sydney people there in Sydney. Canberra follows in October, Melbourne on the 11th of November. So it's going to be a fantastic series. And, thanks for mentioning it, Neil. It'll be great.
All good. And so Sydney, 24th of September. And then you'll be able to see those dates for Canberra and also in Melbourne at the ACL website, acl.org.au, the Australian Christian Lobby website, acl.org.au. The tour is being called Babylon. It's the Truth of It Live tour and how to live as bold Christians in modern day Babylon. Wonderful getting your insights as always, Dan Flynn. Thanks so much for taking some time to share those with listeners today. acl.org.au. Dan Flynn is Deputy Director of the Australian Christian Lobby. Dan, thanks for the update today on 2020.
That's my pleasure, Neil. Thank you.